who the narcissist becomes when the empath stops playing along. There comes a moment in your life when you refuse to move to the rhythm of someone else's control anymore. For so long, the narcissist thrived because you kept acting in the role they quietly assigned you. They lived off your empathy, your softness, your forgiveness, and your constant effort to keep things calm. But the minute you stop cooperating, everything shifts. You don't just change the relationship dynamic, you remove the illusion of control they believed they had. And what remains is the real version of who they are, without your cooperation holding their world together. When the empath steps out of the cycle, the narcissist is pushed into a version of themselves they spent their whole life trying to hide. And that is where your strength begins to grow. They lose control the moment you stop feeding their ego. For as long as you played your part, the narcissist felt invincible. They survived on your reactions, your need to explain, your instinct to care. Every sigh, every tear, every attempt to reason with them was fuel for their ego. They didn't just want your attention, they needed it like air. But the moment you stop giving them emotional energy, everything inside them starts to shake. They act like a performer who suddenly loses their audience. Without your applause, without your willingness to continue the scene, the stage becomes empty, and they have no idea what to do next. They begin to lose control, not because you attacked them, but because you took away what they depended on. That is the truth they never wanted you to uncover. Their control wasn't real. It was borrowed power, and you were the one who supplied it. You see, control for a narcissist isn't about truth. It's about how things look. As long as they could make you believe they had the upper hand, it felt real to them. But once you stop reacting, once you no longer fall for their usual tricks, you pull the illusion right out from under them. And here's the powerful part. You don't need to scream, argue, or defend yourself. Silence and pulling away are far stronger than any verbal fight. When you stop showing up for their battles, they realize they already lost. Suddenly, their insults don't cut the same. Their mind games feel empty. Their power dissolves in the quiet strength of your lack of response. They might push harder at first, but that only proves their grip is slipping. They fall apart because you stopped giving them what kept them feeling important. And that scares them because if they can't control you, they must face how little control they ever had. This is where their unraveling begins. They become unstable, anxious, and more desperate to pull you back into their world. But no matter what they try, once you decide you're done playing, the old rules don't apply. When you walk away from their manipulation cycle, you become unreachable. Not because they don't try anymore, but because you've decided not to be involved. And that decision tears apart their entire approach. The biggest loss a narcissist can face isn't money or status. It's losing power over the person who once cared deeply. That's why the moment you stop feeding their ego, their whole identity begins to fall apart. They scramble, they push, they test every button they once used. But every time you refuse to repeat the old patterns, they are forced to admit their influence is gone. Their control was always an illusion. And once you see that clearly, they lose the foundation of everything they built. And once you learn this truth, there is no return to the old dynamic. You don't lose by walking away. You win by refusing to play their game. And when you stop participating, their control fades like smoke in the wind. Their fake confidence collapses into insecurity. On the outside, a narcissist looks unstoppable. They move with swagger. They speak like they know everything. They act like they're above everyone, but that's not confidence. It's a disguise. And the moment you stop playing along, the disguise starts to fall. Their confidence was never about real self-worth. It was about tricking you into believing they were stronger than they really were. They puffed themselves up like a balloon, but the air inside came from your validation. Without your steady reassurance, without your agreement, the balloon starts losing air. Here's what you need to see clearly. True confidence doesn't break when someone walks away. Real self-esteem doesn't fall apart when someone stops clapping, but theirs does, because it was never real. It was a performance meant to keep you believing in their false image. When you stop responding to their arrogance, they're left with a truth they can't escape. And that truth is insecurity. Deep, painful insecurity that they've tried to hide for years. They'll try to fight it. They'll brag louder, criticize you more, act even more superior. But that extra intensity isn't strength. It's panic. It's them trying to convince themselves they still matter, even though you stopped feeding the illusion. Watch closely, because this is where the cracks appear. The person who once seemed unshakable suddenly becomes reactive, touchy, and even paranoid. Their confidence can't survive without your attention. And once you take it back, they have nothing left to depend on. It's like watching a fragile structure collapse. They built everything on shaky ground, and when you stop supporting it, everything falls. The collapse isn't slow, it's immediate. This is why they explode with anger when you stop reacting. Your silence doesn't just frustrate them, it exposes them. Without your participation, they can't hold up the image they built. And when the image breaks, so does their fake confidence. Think about how many times they claimed they were better, smarter, or more capable. But the moment you stop validating those claims, they become unsettled. That's because their whole sense of self came from your reactions. When their false confidence falls apart, their real self appears. And that real self isn't powerful, it's scared and craving approval. The same person who acted like they needed no one is suddenly revealed as someone who depended on your validation to feel like somebody. That's why your withdrawal is so powerful. You don't damage their ego, you simply stop feeding it. And in the quiet, their mask slides off and the truth rises. It's not your job to fix their insecurity, and it's not your job to protect their image. Your responsibility is to yourself, to protect your energy and your peace. And when you do that, you see clearly what they hoped you'd never notice. Their so-called confidence was nothing but fear dressed as pride. The longer you stay detached, the more they fall apart, because a narcissist without someone to impress is like an actor performing for empty seats, lost and exposed. They become desperate for attention they can no longer get from you. The narcissist has always needed one thing, your attention. It didn't matter if it was affection, anger, confusion, or pain. As long as you reacted, they felt alive. Your emotional energy was their power source. But the moment you stop, they hit a barrier they don't know how to move past. Suddenly, their strongest source of supply, the empath who once gave endlessly, is unavailable. And that creates a panic inside them they can't hide. They start searching wildly. They'll talk to anyone who gives them even a little attention. Friends, family, strangers online, anyone who can help them feel important again. But here's the truth. It never feels the same to them, because no one gives like an empath. No one else offers the same depth, patience, and emotional richness you once gave. And that's why losing you hits them like nothing else. They can replace people easily. They can move to new relationships, but they can't replace the depth of supply they got from you. At first, you might see them trying even harder, posting loudly on social media, pretending they're happier than ever, showing off new people. But all of that noise is just covering up the emptiness they feel. Those displays aren't real confidence. They're desperate attempts to get attention. They'll test old tactics to pull you back. The sudden messages, the dramatic apologies, the promises of change. But none of it is genuine. It's bait. It's neediness pretending to be sincerity. Because what they want isn't love. It's fuel. And when you refuse to provide it, their panic deepens. They may lash out more, accuse you of things, or try to damage your reputation. But every reaction comes from one place: fear of losing control. They can't handle that you've shut the door on the role they expected you to play. Think about how often they fed on your tears, your explanations, your attempts to fix things. That was their emotional supply. Without it, they're forced to face a truth they can't stand. Your life no longer revolves around them. This is when their mask cracks the quickest. The charming behavior becomes bitter. The confident tone becomes frantic. The cold exterior becomes unstable and desperate. It's not love they're missing. It's the feeling of being in control. And once you understand that, you stop falling for their traps. Their desperation reveals the truth. Without you, they feel empty. They can be around crowds of people, but it will never replace the energy they once got from you. That emptiness is their real battle, and it terrifies them. The more desperate they grow, the more you realize you had the real power all along. Because if you were unimportant, they wouldn't fight so hard to get your attention back. Every time you ignore a text, decline a call, or refuse to argue, they're reminded that you're no longer theirs to control. And the longer you keep that boundary, the more their desperation rises. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to act. Simply not playing along starves them of the attention they crave. And that's when they face the truth. They can't survive without attention, and you're no longer giving it. Their manipulations lose their power. Everything a narcissist does is built on manipulation. They know which words to choose, which emotions to trigger, and which moves will make you bend. For a long time, those tactics worked. They conditioned you to feel guilty, to explain yourself, to chase their approval. But once you stop playing along, their world changes. Suddenly, their tools don't work the same way. The guilt trips sound weak. The silent treatment gives you peace instead of anxiety. The love bombing feels obvious and fake. What once had the power to pull you back now feels empty. And here's what frustrates them the most. They don't understand why. In their mind, you were predictable. You always apologized first. You always tried to fix the situation. You always responded to their emotional games. But now their usual tactics fall flat. The narcissist thrives on predictable responses. If they can predict you, they can control the dynamic. But once you stop reacting, their game ends. And they hate unpredictability more than anything because it means they've lost their hold. They'll cycle through every technique they know: cold silence, explosive anger, fake kindness, pretend regret. They'll try everything. But when none of it works, fear takes over. Their tricks have no power without your participation. This is the moment you see their weakness clearly. Someone with real strength doesn't need manipulation to keep people close. Someone with real love doesn't rely on guilt or fear. But the narcissist only knows manipulation. And when it fails, their true fragility appears. The silent treatment that once broke you now feels like relief. The guilt trips that once made you doubt yourself now look like simple tactics. Their charm, once powerful, now feels like a cheap act. And that shift is what breaks them, not because you shouted, but because you changed your response. The strongest rebellion is calm indifference, and when you master that, their manipulation loses all power. This is where their frustration explodes. They can't handle losing control. They can't handle the failure of their old tricks. And so they become messy, aggressive, and careless. That's when the mask fully slips. The person who once seemed sharp and calculating suddenly looks unsteady, desperate, and almost childish in their attempts to provoke you. Because manipulation only works when both people play their roles. Without your part, the entire act collapses. You always held the key. The difference now is that you took it back. And without it, they're locked out of the power they once thought they had over you. That realization cuts them deeply. Every time you stay calm, every time you choose not to react, you take away the tools they relied on. And eventually, they're left with nothing but the truth. They have no power over someone who refuses to play. Their manipulations don't break you anymore. They expose them. And that exposure is their greatest fear because once the mask comes off, they can't put it back on in front of you. You don't need to fight to win. You just need to stop reacting. And when you do, every tactic they've ever used becomes powerless. They're forced to face a truth they avoided their entire life. For the narcissist, truth is the enemy. Their entire false identity depends on escaping it. They built a mask so carefully, a story so polished, that even they tried to believe it. The mask said they were stronger, better, desired, and needed. But when you stop playing along, that mask is torn off. And beneath it is the reality they've been running from forever. The truth is that without control, they feel ordinary. Without your energy, they feel hollow. Without your forgiveness, they feel exposed. That reality is unbearable for them. It's why they needed you in the first place, to avoid facing what's inside. For years, they relied on you to carry the emotional weight they didn't want to face. You absorbed their anger, soothed their doubts, shielded their flaws. You acted as their protection from their own truth. But when you step away, that protection disappears, and suddenly they must face what they've avoided. The truth is, they're not as strong as they pretend. They're not as confident, not as in control, not as admired as they claim. And when you stop supporting their illusion, it all collapses. That is why they spiral, because facing themselves is unbearable. Seeing insecurity instead of confidence, fear instead of dominance, shakes their entire identity. And for the first time, they can't run because you're no longer there to hold up the image. They'll try to blame you. They'll call you weak, broken, dramatic, or bitter because pointing fingers is easier than looking inward. But no matter what they say, the truth doesn't change. Without you softening their world, they're left with the emptiness they've been avoiding. And here is the twist. The person they thought they controlled is now the mirror they can't escape. By refusing to play along, you reflect the one thing they fear most, their lack of real power. The more you heal, the more obvious that truth becomes. Your strength highlights their weakness. Your silence reveals their noise. Your peace exposes their chaos. And that contrast is something they can't bear to face. This is why they grow irritated, angry, and chaotic. Not because you did anything wrong, but because they now must face what they've avoided for years. They've lost the shield, the distraction, the comfort. All that remains is the truth of who they are, and it terrifies them. The truth is they've always been dependent on your patience, your compassion, your emotional strength, and without it, they must face how powerless they truly are. That realization is something they've been fighting against all their lives, and now it's staring right at them. Every failed tactic, every desperate move, every collapsing illusion leads back to the same truth. They were never in control, and they never had the power they claimed. And while this truth feels like destruction for them, it becomes freedom for you, because once you see them clearly, you can never unsee it. You realize they're not powerful giants, they're insecure performers hiding behind masks. And without your stage, their performance ends. That's the shift they can't tolerate. The person who once protected their illusion is now the reason they must face reality. And reality is their greatest fear. In the end, the truth doesn't break you. It breaks the mask they live behind. And that is who the narcissist becomes when the empath stops playing along. Someone stripped of illusions, forced to sit with the truth they've avoided with nowhere left to run. When the empath finally stops playing the game, the narcissist is left open and exposed in ways they never prepared for. Their illusion of control fades. Their fake confidence collapses. Their hunger for attention goes unanswered, their manipulations fail, and the truth they avoided their whole life stands directly in front of them. That's when you understand something life-changing. The power was never theirs. It always belonged to you. The courage to walk away, to stop feeding the cycle, to choose calm instead of reacting, that is what breaks their illusion forever. And while their world starts falling apart, yours begins to rise, stronger, clearer, and more powerful than they ever wanted you to be.